Perfect. Welcome back to Project Calm, episode 7. My name is James. I'm your host. And by now, I'm sure it's very apparent that every single individual person in the world has such a unique mental health journey. And this one's no different. Now, without further ado, Shalom, Shalom. How's your day going?
Well, it's going with some good amount of shalom today. It's really my name is kind of funny because I did change it legally back in 2005, I think it was, and I had no idea the depth of meaning of that name when I had it changed legally. I just thought it meant peace or hello, or
Yeah.
goodbye. They use it for that as well. And when I found the the gravity of, I mean, if you really do a little Hebrew word search on that, it's weighty. It's weighty. And if I had known that, I would have probably not chosen that name because there's no way to live up to it because it's that peace that passes understanding.
Uh-huh.
And there's more. But that right there is enough. If I'd have known that, I would have been a little hesitant to take on such a name because there's no living up to it. But it was something that I coveted because my life had not been peaceful and I
Uh-huh.
wanted peace. And so I thought, well, I want to become peaceful. And so I
Yeah.
thought that calling myself Shalom might help. Names matter.
Yeah.
And I'm working on the Shalom and the calm is helping.
That's wait, so what was your name before Shalom? Or what did you
It
go
was
by?
it was Sheila. So I
Sheila.
still kept the same initial.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But it was Sheila, and I'll be honest with you. Um, before, let's see, in 2001, I
Yeah.
had what a lot of people would call a born again experience. Okay.
Mm,
And I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's the
mm.
truth for me. It's what I experienced, and it's what everybody can experience, in my humble opinion, and also the opinion of the scriptures. But hey, the point is, so in 2001, when I got born again, I was delivered out of over 20 years of practicing witchcraft, which when I was doing that, I really thought it was, I was becoming
Mhm.
more enlightened and everything. Um, and I did learn a lot of things, but it was not a good path. I discovered a lot of things about it when I was in it that actually were kind of leading me in a bad direction and exacerbating my anxiety and all my other mental health issues.
Yeah.
Especially since the crowd that I was running with. And I'm not saying that all people that practice Wicca are drug heads and sex addicts, but a lot of them are, just like a lot of people in any people group go the wrong
Mhm.
way. And so I was hanging with those people and it was making things so much worse. And so when I got born again, it was night and day. And so I had a huge life change and it was much better. I miraculously, literally miraculously, had my desire for the party and all that sort of thing taken away. And I had always wanted to, because I was getting older, I was in my early 40s, and I had always wanted to slow down because I had a feeling that the drugs and alcohol and the parties and everything were not a good choice for the problems that I was having
Mhm.
and that they were making it worse. But I wasn't planning on quitting, you know. So it was a pure miracle and it was a complete 180 for me. And that helped a lot right there. However, I had a lot of issues with abuse trauma in my past. And,
Mm.
one of the reasons that I had gotten into the drugs and the alcohol and the party was self medication, trying
Mhm.
to distract myself, trying not to feel those feelings.
Numb the
This is
pain.
absolutely, it's become common knowledge almost now that that's a problem that
Mm.
goes with the drugging and drinking and stuff. That it is an attempt, not to feel, not to have to go through those feelings and work through them and grow through them, but it's the wrong thing to do. And you end up with a stunted emotional growth. And so it was really weird giving all of that stuff up that I had been doing for over 20 years. And so I was having to cope with a lot of things that I had not allowed myself to cope with. And then it got worse because it turned out I married a guy that was a covert narcissist. And after 11 years with him, there was a lot of damage from that went on top of all the other stuff. And plus I think getting older, I went through menopause and all that fun stuff. And, all of these things have been a challenge and made it a little more difficult for me to cope without the drugs and the alcohol. And I did actually quit smoking. It took me longer. I didn't have the immediate miracle from above of quitting smoking. Little by little, though, I was finally able to quit smoking. But, then it was like I started rolling the coping mechanisms that I had formerly used into a food addiction, which I always had a little bit of trouble with. But it started getting really serious because I didn't have anything else to lean on except Father in Heaven, which was helping. But I had growth to do, and I was still trying not to have to face a lot of that because it was painful, And so, it's been a really weird journey, and it continues to be an interesting journey. But I do have a prescription because my official diagnosis is complex PTSD, along with depression, which seems to run in my family. And, that's not fun. So it's there's a lot of stuff. And so the prescription, though, is for alprazolam, which, of course, most people know is the generic Xanax. And I don't like it. And I especially don't like the side effects and the potential side effects. My mother took alprazolam most of her life for depression and also for pain. She had chronic pain from a pinched nerve. And she was also having to take codeine. That's a very bad and dangerous combination. And I have no doubt that it contributed to her ending up with vascular dementia, the little mini strokes that happen over and over again until you finally succumb. And that was brutal for both of us because she was living with me the last 6 years of her life, and I was her caregiver. And I was in no shape to be a caregiver, and it really broke me down. And we had a tough time until Father in Heaven had mercy on her and took her on. It lasted about, the really hard part of it lasted about 6 months. The last 2 months were agony, but, he was merciful and finally took her on home. And it was a peaceful death when she died. And when I found her that evening, I was coming in to check on her. I had to check on her all through the night because she had been, restless. But she was quiet when I came in, and she looked like she was peacefully sleeping. And she was still warm, James. And so I know I got there pretty soon after she passed, but she didn't look like there was any struggle or pain or horror or anything. And she was having a lot of pain and horror there toward the end. So it was actually a relief, to see that she had passed on. But I don't want to go like that, James. I don't want to end up with the dementia, I'm telling you. And I try not to take the alprazolam unless I absolutely have to. But I need it a lot. And sometimes I don't take it when I need it. They only give you so much.
Yeah.
But even that, I try to keep it tamped down. And so there are a lot of times when I need something to help me deal with the anxiety, because look, I'm getting older. I'm going to be 69 next year, or not next year, in November. And so that's hanging over my head. And I'm starting to have problems with my hips and my back and my neck. And so there's physical pain as well as emotional pain and trauma to deal with now. And that doesn't help. That makes me even more anxious, because I'm on my own here. I live alone. I don't have any children except my fur baby. And so, it's a little scary being a woman alone, trying to cope as age comes upon me. And, I'm starting to find it difficult mobility wise. It's become so extreme that I even qualified for one of those wheelchair placard things in my car, which is really handy because it does help me to get out more. And, because I can park closer and I don't have to hobble as far to get into the store or wherever. But so, yeah, it's really, there's a lot of challenges. I have to also say that Yahweh, our Father in heaven, miraculously continues to show up in my life. And I really need not to be anxious. And I'll tell you another thing that's really a conundrum is I get to feeling when I start feeling anxious, I feel really guilty for it because I know I really shouldn't be afraid, because he always comes through. He really does. And even when it looks like he doesn't, let a little bit of time go by and I can look back and say, he did come through. And so I guess it's kind of like the poor old Israelites, they saw all these miracles and everything, and they still, and they saw the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, and they saw the Red Sea part and all of that, and they still got scared and they still didn't totally trust. So in a way, I think he let us see that story in scripture so that we wouldn't feel quite as guilty, but so that we would realize how silly it is. I don't know. But anyway, he also does send us tools. And I think the KALM is one of those tools. Of course, Tikva is one because she's my service dog, and she is so good at it. Every service dog I had was good, and they were all Great Danes. They make awesome service dogs. But Tikva, she's extra. I think she's an angel with fur. Let's see here. She says, that's me. I'm the angel with fur. She figured it out. She knows who I am.
She knew we were talking about her. She's like, it's my turn to show on the camera.
Smart dog.
Yeah.
Listen, they understand English. They kind of do this little no speaking to English thing at times whenever it's convenient, like get back to the house. It's like, no, it's nice out here, no speaking to English. What? I don't know, but she's really very obedient. She doesn't do that a lot. I'm just teasing.
I think you're 100% spot on having multiple tools, because our mental health is just so complex. There's never going to be a single magical thing, cure, or whatever action you do that's going to make you go from 0 from 100, right? There's a bunch of smaller actions that stack up, like having Tikva, growing spiritually, and then having KALM in your back pocket. And then I know you also do like to lie in the sun, but we're going to get to that a little bit later. Now, I wanted to take a step back, and I wanted to go all the way to the beginning when you talked about witchcraft. I think when you mentioned witchcraft, a lot of people, I myself don't know what that entails. It sounded like it's just a bunch of partying. Is witchcraft partying, or is it something else that, if you had to describe witchcraft in a few sentences, what would it be?
Okay, it is essentially On the surface, it's nature worship. Okay. When I was
Mhm.
practicing witchcraft, that's how I viewed it. I was a nature worshiper.
Mhm.
And basically now in terms of my current faith and my forever faith, um, I was worshiping the creation instead of the creator. I did believe in a creator, but most Wiccans think of the creator as being a, they don't, they, or I didn't. Okay. I'll just tell you where I was coming from.
Mhm.
Witchcraft can be very, very different. It's almost as it's almost as differentiated as Christianity. They don't have churches per se, but they do have different traditions. And usually it's like
Mhm.
based on something like you've got a Celtic form of witchcraft, you've got an Egyptian pantheon, you've got a Norse
Mhm.
pantheon. You know, and there's even a Native American pantheon, although some of those Native Americans actually, I don't know if you've ever listened, but sometimes when they do their chants, their dances and stuff, they're actually saying Yahweh, Yahweh. They know, some of them, some of the tribes know the name.
Yeah.
And there's evidence that some of those tribes are actually descendants of Hebrews. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. So
Yeah.
they have different pantheons, and so they all have different gods and goddesses and that sort of thing. Now, I was what I called an eclectic witch, and so I kind of picked from all the different traditions the stuff that resonated with me, almost like
Mhm.
decorating a Christmas tree. I'm going to put this on and this on, and this works for me, and I like the way this looks.
Yeah.
And so um, the only problem is scripture wisely points out that there are many people groups in the past who have done what was right in their own eyes. And that's
Mhm.
basically what I was doing. And that's basically what most people that don't follow scripture do. Most faiths don't have a wonderful instruction book, that like the one that we've been given. And um, so, yeah, there were lots of different things, but I have to say that when I was involved in it, I did not think there were any satanic components at all.
Mhm.
Now that I'm out of it, I look back and I know now there were red flags that I ignored because I didn't want to believe that. Now, I was never taken into the upper echelons there are groups like that are
There are
more in.
there are rankings,
Say
and
what?
you said upper echelon, so I'm assuming there's rankings in witchcraft. Is that?
Not officially. It's
Yeah.
more of a social thing. You don't get into
Okay.
that group unless you've got the connections. And rightly so, because when I was into it, it was like in the 80s and the 90s. And
Uh-huh.
witchcraft was still what we used to call in the broom closet, because you could
Okay.
lose your job for stuff like that. It was
Mhm.
frowned upon so much back then, but it was then, and more so now, becoming one of the fastest growing religions in this country.
Got it.
And it's very popular. It seems like a lot of fun. It seems like it makes a lot of sense when you get involved with it. And I apologize if I'm hurting anybody's sensibilities out there that might be
Yeah.
involved in it. I don't think less of people who choose to follow the Wiccan path. However, I do think that they haven't been at it long enough to see what's wrong with
Mhm.
it. And also, like so many other people, like, people that get involved in cults, even Christian cults, they
Mhm.
don't realize it. They get caught up in it. It's almost like joining a gang, I mean, because you're in the gang, you've got family, you've got friends, you've got, and if you leave, it
Mhm.
changes your life completely. It sure did mine. I mean, every friend I had except one, and she's, walked out now. Well, actually, I had to walk away from her eventually, because she just was more and more into evil things. And
Mm.
but yeah, and of course, to people that are into partying. I mean, if it's even worse, if you've got a party and a gang or a religious group or something that you're involved with, party people, you know, they don't want to hang with you if you don't party. It's no fun to hang with somebody that's straight, you know, because they're not having fun like you are. And frankly, most straight people, I can tell you from my experience now, don't want to hang out with drunks and and takers, you know, because they can't relate. So yeah, it's we get onto different paths, and it depends on, you know, how we adjust our thinking, how we change it. It's not, you know, there's cognitive dissonance that people get caught up in, and they can't see what's wrong with what they're doing at the time. So it really was, again, it was like a miracle when my eyes were opened. But, you know, again, I don't think less of those people. I pray for them because I really think there's a better way, even if you're not doing it with the drugs and everything. Because when you know, really more than worshiping a god and goddess, because they, you know, generally that even in all the pantheons, they almost all generally will worship a god and a goddess because they observe polarity in nature. And that polarity, they think, is about the only thing they can really latch onto for worship, that they can say, that they can describe God with. The creative force, I used to call it the ultimate creative force, you know. And I said, we can't, you know, because I used to actually basically proselytize for witchcraft, which is not common, but it was something I felt. So I wanted to share, you know, it's just like when you find something good, you want to share it, you know. And so I would witness for Wicca, basically. And you know, I would tell people, you know, the ultimate creative force is just so beyond our comprehension that all we can really do is name things that we know are aspects of it that we see reflected in nature, which includes male, female. So I was worshiping a god and a goddess to represent the ultimate creative force. And so that's, you know, who I would talk to and pray to and have rituals to and call down and stuff like that. The problem with that is, if the scriptures are true, if they are, then there is only one way. You know, one of the sayings that we had in Wicca was all paths lead to the same top of the hill. But that's not what the scriptures say. And so if, you know, if you're not, I was worshiping the wrong God, I believe.
Okay.
And I think that that's sad. You miss out on a lot because there's a whole lot more power. See, that's the thing. Whenever I got born again, I saw way more power and miracles than I had seen when I was practicing witchcraft, because that's where the power really is. And it's not the kind of power that empowers you as an individual to lord it over other people. It's the kind of power that helps you to keep going, you know. And really, I mean, you know, one thing that it's kind of uncomfortable to talk about, but it is important, I think. In my family, like I said, there's depression has been a problem with most people on my mother's side. I don't really know anything about my father's side much. I know a little, but not much. And but I do know about the depression, and I do know about suicidal ideation. And my mother was one of 4 children, and her brother, both her brother and her sister, eventually committed suicide. They were, let's see, he was in his 30s, I think, and she was in her 50s, I believe. And they both shot themselves. And my mother attempted suicide as a teenager. She cut her wrists. And so, you know, this is something where you are saying, see, like, because I had suicidal ideation, and I still sometimes do, to be honest. But the thing about it is, when I got born again, I realized if I'm here, that's his will. I'm supposed to be here. I don't know why exactly.
Mm.
I imagine he uses me in ways I don't know about. But I do believe that I'm supposed to be here. And that if I were to take my own life just to get out of all of the stuff I'm scared of, it would be going against his will. And frankly, the definition of witchcraft in Scripture is rebellion. And that's when you say my will. And anytime you do a magic spell, one of the things you say at the end of a magic spell is, as I will, so mote it be. So you are, when you do your little vision boards and all that kind of stuff, there is a certain amount of benefit to doing things like that. But when it becomes my will and not thy will, then you're in rebellion, and then you've got problems. And I believe that if you take your own life, it's like doing witchcraft. It's my will. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to put it to a stop.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not an option for me any longer, and it hasn't been since I got born again. However, like I said, sometimes it still comes to mind just because it gets hard sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't allow myself to go there, and I pray for help from the Holy Spirit to turn myself around, and he always comes through. So yeah, things are hard right now. There are days that I don't want to get up. But, one thing about it, I will say about the KALM, is knowing that the KALM is out there in the kitchen. It helps me run up, because it really, once I get it down, I do feel better. And I do feel more able to face the day. Now, when the pain is really bad, which on many days it is, it's so bad, it's just hard to stand up. It hurts really bad.
Yeah.
And on days like that, it's, and the KALM, I think it helps a little bit with the pain, but
Mm-hmm.
I have ordered the, what's the name?
Zen body.
The Zen body. I've got that on the
Mm-hmm.
way, and I'm going to try that and see how that helps. But
Yeah.
I guess the bottom line here is that, as you said, we have to try different modalities. We have to do different things, but getting an alternative to the alprazolam, which I still have it, and I still take it if it's like, if the KALM doesn't do anything for it, although I haven't run into that yet.
Yeah.
Every time I have thought I needed the alprazolam, I took the KALM, and for the last, it's been almost a month now, and I didn't have to take the alprazolam. So I'm really loving that. But yeah, I'll let you talk.
No, I was just soaking because I love learning new things. And then when you said witchcraft, the first thing that came to my mind is when you see a cartoon with like those big hats, they're like stirring something in like a pot. So I'm
Right.
like, is that the type of witchcraft? But then the way you explained everything is just so fascinating. So I was just like, ears open, and I'm like, oh, so there's side of the world, and it's super cool. And when you mentioned like, oh, people join witchcraft or some people join gangs and things like that, I think it's just human nature to want to be
Yes.
included in things, and especially because the loneliness can be so painful. And as soon as you find a place where people are willing to accept you for who you are, or maybe not who you are, but they kind of help you to become a part of them, and you're willing to change
Yes.
so that
Someplace
you
you
can.
feel like you can fit in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel like we went straight into the story, but the audience may not know who you are. Yes, yeah, Shalom. What during all this time, like what were you doing in the daytime? What was your day job? What was your profession? What career path were you in? Can you give us a bit of a background on that aspect?
Sure. Well, my mom had a master's degree in English, and she was a school teacher. And so education and, becoming academically adept was ground into me as I grew up. And so I knew, she wanted me to go to college, and she saved up, even though she was raising me on her own. She, and I got loans and grants and, but between all of that and her help, I finally got the degree. And what I went for, now I didn't, it's kind of funny because I really, I'm really much more right-brained like she was. She had her master's in English, and she taught all kinds of things, but she taught art, she taught English lit, and she taught lots of things. But anyway, they were all, more right-brained sorts of things, liberal arts types of things. So I really wasn't a natural at math or science. However, I could do it. I knew how to learn. I was a very good learner thanks to her, because she really, drilled that into me, how important it was to learn and to read and to study and to do your homework and everything. So I ended up going to college at Tennessee Technological University. We like to call it the MIT of the South. And it really is a really good school for engineering. And my mom had gone to school there, even though she got, they give out liberal arts degrees too. But she wanted me to go there, and I did apply and get in, and I got my degree in chemical engineering. And at the time, so she told me, she said, now chemical engineering is the highest paid bachelor's degree you can get right now. This was in the 70s when I got in high school. And I don't know where it stands now, but I'm sure it's still up there. And one reason too is it's a really, really hard degree. I mean, chemical engineering is tough. Chemistry is tough, and engineering is tough. And so it wasn't easy. In fact, it took me a lot longer than 4 years to finish my degree, but also partly because I was partying all the time. So I would go to school, for a couple of quarters, and then I would take a quarter off, and then I would go back. And then the other thing was, I did end up changing my major several times, but I ended up back in chemical engineering in the end, and that's what I got my degree in. Now, when I went to get a job, I ended up working, my first job was for the state of Tennessee, the Department of Air Pollution Control. And so I was working for the state environmental regulatory agencies. And my job then was to write air permits for air pollution sources at different, companies and businesses and stuff. And I went on from there to work for a water heater manufacturer. And then from there, I got a job at Boeing out in Oak Ridge, which was what brought me to Knoxville, where I live now. And I just love living here. So after that, though, I ended up going into consulting firms. I started working for consulting firms, and they would hire me out to different companies to do environmental regulatory tasks. Like what I ended up really specializing in was hazardous waste and materials. And the next level from that, just knowing those regulations and specializing in that, I ended up also learning how to do training, corporate training for that. And that was my favorite thing, because I was kind of being like my mom. I was teaching basically, but it was on a corporate level, which I really liked better, because teaching kids is a whole nother deal. But teaching adults was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. And so I got to travel and go to these different companies and go through their facilities and find all of their pollution sources, and then write up a training program for the employees in those areas, so that they would know how to keep that facility in compliance with the state and federal environmental regulations and not get big fines and stuff,
Yeah.
So the only problem with that, well, there were a few problems, I guess, but one of the biggest that relates to what we're talking about is I got a lot of exposure to toxins.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has also contributed to, again, exacerbating all of the issues that came along from my childhood. And I already had some traumatic experiences as a child that, made the depression worse and made the anxiety worse. And then when we moved to Florida, when I was going from elementary school to junior high school, I had a really bad trauma. Just, and I haven't been officially diagnosed, but my mom, her assessment after we did some research on autism and, and my own personal research on it, I do fit the, all of the criteria for being on the spectrum. And so I think that's one reason why when we moved to Florida, along with the fact that Florida is not a southern state, and I came from Tennessee, and I had a real heavy southern accent, and so those kids down there were mostly from up north, and they thought I talked real funny. And so I was really different in a lot of ways when we moved down there. And it was pretty hard. I got bullied severely. They wouldn't let me sit on the bus. They wouldn't let me sit at lunch. And it wasn't until a couple of years into junior high school that the biggest drug dealer in school decided that she was going to befriend me. And one day at lunch, I went in there and I couldn't find it. I was standing there with my tray. There was no place anybody would let me sit. She got up and came over to me and she said, "Would you like to sit with me?" And I said, So I went and sat with her and we became friends. And she said, "I'm going to help you out. I'm going to teach you how to be cool." Now, this was in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And cool was in full swing and we were little hippies, And so she did a lot of things to teach me, the lingo and what to wear, because I didn't wear the right clothes and I didn't have the right glasses. And it was bad. I had so many things that I was teased about. And she even talked me into getting a tape recorder for Christmas. I got my mom to get me a tape recorder that Christmas so that I could work on my accent and not sound like a hick. And it made a difference.
There was some good to this friendship. It's
yeah, but there was a big price because she's the one that got into drugs and alcohol and parties. But see, the thing is, we had basically two groups in our junior high school. We had what we called the freaks, which was the hippies that took drugs and stuff. And we had the Ivies, we called them. And the Ivies were in the band and they, and they were the kids that had a whole lot of money and stuff, and, it was just, we were polar opposites, these groups. And, but if you were in the hippie group, if you were a freak, nobody messed with you because they were like, everybody knew we were crazy. I mean, just like the Native Americans, they say, don't mess with a crazy person, just don't, because they're dangerous. You don't know what they're going to do. And so that gave me protection. They didn't bully me anymore. And, but it caused me to grow up hanging out with really bad groups. And I did that for a long time, and it felt safe. And in some ways it was, but as you can imagine, in other ways it was very unsafe. The risk-taking was crazy. And it's kind of a miracle that I made it through all of that, frankly.
And you can only notice.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say you can only notice the like how bad those decisions were only when you look in retrospect. When you're in it, it's just like, oh, I have friends. Oh, the drinking is, I'm not feeling depressed for those however many hours I'm drunk. So it's just like this constant, and so it kind of seems like that was your foot in the door to the witchcraft. You mentioned.
It was because one of the
Yeah.
girls that I was partying with was into witchcraft. And so I started hanging out
Mm,
with her. And I started reading about witchcraft. And then, let's see, I think it was in, what year was it? It was in the late 70s
yeah.
that I ended up in Atlanta, where at that time, the only public coven in the whole nation, because like I said, people were underground doing witchcraft. They didn't, it was not it was not acceptable in decent society.
Mhm.
And it was the only public coven in the country, and it was called the Church and School of Ravenwood, and they were in the heart of Atlanta, and it was really weird. It was a really weird place. They had this really creepy looking, it looked like a haunted house, ancient house, and they had a place in the backyard for a circle, a magic circle, and we had circles back there and stuff. And it was a school, and so I enrolled as it's an informal school, and
Yeah.
I enrolled as a neophyte witch, and that's how it all got, really started at that point. Um, yeah, and it really got weird from there. I can tell you
For
it was.
for the next 20 years, things were
Yeah.
kind of freaky. Your life is like, I'm like, you're telling me this story, and I'm just like picturing it in my head, and it just looks like a movie in like the 70s. It's super fascinating.
It was fast. Well, I mean, it wasn't boring. I'll say that. I
Yeah.
was never bored. And if anybody wants to see my testimony, it's on
Yeah.
YouTube. It's on YouTube, but it's also on the CBN website. And
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. Can we put links in the show
Yeah.
notes here? Okay.
We can figure that
But
out afterwards.
but yeah,
Yeah.
the 700 Club actually came out in 2007 to do a little, one of their 5-minute things on my testimony, and that was my
Yeah.
my 5 minutes of fame. And it was really cool because they said that a whole lot of people called in. The Pat Robertson gave the call to, to prayer and to call in and pray and get born again and everything. And they said they
Yeah.
had, I think the producer said they had over 600 calls the first time they aired it.
Yeah.
And so that felt really good because I believe I'm going to see those people someday in the kingdom.
Yeah.
Because I think some of those people, and I'm not saying all of them stuck, because just saying a prayer. I mean, yeah, it's a big thing to confess
Mhm.
your sin and to turn from your sin and everything. But you really need to be discipled, and a lot of times people that aren't discipled, they're like, what Yeshua, Jesus, described as, seed that falls among thorns.
Yeah.
It's really hard to grow in your faith if you are living among thorns and you don't have any way
Roots.
to learn and grow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. Well, I want to. We took a big roundabout turn on on this story. It's, I guess, kind of similar to how your life was. You kind of took like a big roundabout turn, but you ended up coming back to where you were intended to be, and to be born again, and kind of everything life happened for a reason that got you to where you are today, right?
Yes, absolutely. I do believe that. I think there's a plan for us. I think that we are given opportunities throughout our life to
Hmm.
find the way. And and I mean, sure, there are people that don't find the way. Now, I
Hmm.
have I have developed some kind of See, like I was always on the fringe, even when I was a witch. I was kind of on the fringe of that group, and I'm kind of on the fringe of my scripture based groups now. I don't. I found out, well, and I'll explain it to you. I found out in 2007 about something called Messianic Judaism. So there are Jewish people that some people call them completed Jews that believe that Jesus, Yeshua, which is his Hebrew name, is the Messiah. And so those people, they practice Christianity. Some of them practice Christianity. They just completely abandon their Jewish faith and traditions, and they go to Christian churches.
Yeah.
However, there are some of them that continue to keep the Torah. And so they continue to do the feasts of Yahweh, like the Feast of Tabernacles and Yom Kippur and Passover and all that. Okay. And I think more people are becoming more aware of that with the internet and all. But anyway, the thing about it is when I got born again, I knew from having practiced Wicca that, a lot of the Christian holidays like Easter and Christmas are, well, originally, this was not something that the original believers did. They didn't celebrate Christmas and Easter,
Oh.
No, like the apostles, you don't see that.
Yeah.
Really early, they didn't celebrate. They didn't celebrate his birth. And really, see, in Hebrew culture, that was never a thing. They didn't really do birthdays. And also even on Easter, the big problem with these things is that certain churches in the beginning took pagan holidays, like, for example, Yule is Yule for pagans it's at the winter solstice. So it's usually around the 21st of December. It's, the solstice when the night is the longest. And Yule, they call it Yule because they burn a Yule log. And because they're afraid that the gods are not going to let the sun come back because it's the longest night of the year. So they burn a Yule, they get a great big log and they burn it all night long. That's the Yule log. And, offering it to the gods to please, bring the sun back. So anyway, the thing is that a lot of pagans were brought into the faith by starting these holidays on these old pagan holidays. Okay. And so I knew that stuff from practice because, like, I celebrated Yule. Oh boy, I loved Yule. And I celebrated Easter, which is named after Astara, who was a Germanic goddess of fertility. And that's where you get the rabbit and the eggs and all that stuff. Anyway, so I had a problem with all of that when I got born again. I was like, well, but, I do see truth here that I didn't see before. Once I started digging into it, I was just blown away at how much evidence there was for scripture veracity. But there was this hang up with the holidays. And then when I found Messianic Judaism, or Hebrew roots, some people like to call it, it's just, basically recognizing the feasts of Yahweh and celebrating those and not celebrating man-made traditions. And so, because there's a lot of bad fruit. That's another thing I saw when I started going to church and stuff, because I started off at the Baptist church and I learned a bunch and it was very helpful and the people were very kind. But I did see a lot of bad fruit with stuff like Christmas and Easter, the consumerism and all of that sort of thing, and the gluttony, and so it was really, really tricky for me until when I found Messianic Judaism and the Hebrew roots. I finally found a version of following scripture that didn't include doing those holidays anymore. And so that gave me a lot of peace. And so I learned a whole bunch more about it. Ended up also keeping the Sabbath on Saturday. So a lot of people think I'm an Adventist, but I'm not. Really, I don't even, attend. We don't really have, there's only really one congregation in town here that meets regularly on Shabbat, we call it. And I used to go there, but then I went to some other places that are no longer teaching and preaching because they retired. And then so that few years went by. And when my mom passed, I wanted the fellowship so I tried to go back to the place that I had started out. But now I had Tikva. And so I explained that to the pastor. And I explained to him that I had become severely agoraphobic and that I just couldn't leave the house without her. And I said, but I know that the Americans with Disabilities Act does not, it just doesn't apply to churches. They're an exception. Now, she can go into any 5-star restaurant. She's been to the Tennessee Theater to watch operas. And, she's just such a wonderful service dog. She's so obedient. She's just wonderful. And everybody loves her pretty much. I mean, sometimes I think people that don't love her, I got to watch out for because I think that's a sign. But anyway, so the thing was, though, that he told me when I called and asked him about that she was welcome to come as long as she continued to make herself welcome, which is, you expect that. Even a service dog, a legitimate service dog at a 5-star restaurant, for example, they can ask the dog to leave if it doesn't behave properly. Of course.
Yeah.
And so, but again, with the churches, they can just decide no, for no reason. They don't have to give a reason. And so I thought that was a fair situation. And so I started going there. But then after a few months, I found out that his wife had not been involved in his decision. And she really is not a fan of dogs in general. It wasn't Tikva particular. And I think she was miffed about the fact that she had not been consulted before he said it was okay. So he called one day and said, Shalom, I just wanted to call and let you know that we love you. And I said, oh, how wonderful. Thank you. And then he said, literally, he said, but, and I said, but what, And he said, well, we've decided that we're not going to allow dogs at our church anymore, even though she's not just a dog. She is a service dog, which is actually legally supposed to be treated as a piece of medical equipment. So it's like telling somebody that needs oxygen that they can't bring their tank, but they can still come.
Yeah.
So that was kind of hard to take. So I can't go there now. So it's really pretty lonely. I don't have a lot of fellowship, and the few friends I have don't live here. And my mom is gone now, which was really a huge blow. And I'm still dealing with that, to be honest. But I will say, again, I find new things to help, and I'm helped in different ways every day I honestly believe supernaturally. There's no other explanation. And I do think, quite frankly, I do think that Yahweh led me to find the calm because it has been helping.
Yeah. There's a lot of things to digest here. I want to take a step back on.
And I know I just want to interrupt you and quickly explain.
Yeah.
The autism thing. There's also that's comorbid with that is I was diagnosed with both OCD and ADHD, and when my shrink told me that, this was years ago. I'm not seeing one now, although I wish I had the money to, and that my insurance covered it a little more. But the thing is, when he told me, I said, is it even possible? How do you, because like they're diametrically opposed, OCD and ADHD. That's, one is laser focused and one is like totally scattered. And he said, yes, it is possible. Go look in the mirror. So I rabbit trail like crazy. But once I get on, onto something like, especially like I'm a research hound, and that was what I did with your product. I mean, I got laser focused on that. And I really, really researched it. It checked all the boxes, because I'm super picky, because I've really been into natural cures ever since, well, let's see, it's been ever since like 1990, probably 1998 or 9. I started really digging into alternative therapies and modalities. And so I really dug into the rabbit hole on the KALM. I looked at your certificate of authorization, authenticity, and I looked up the different terpenes and stuff like that, and it, and the fact that it's organic, and I mean, gosh, it's just it, and of course at first, and I understand now why you make it a point to tell people this is not CBD. Because it's not. I mean, it's got some CBD in it, but that is not the mechanism of how this works. Now, I know you've worked out the details, and I didn't get far enough down the rabbit hole to be as up on it as I'm sure you are, because I can't imagine that somehow or another you have come up with a formula for the way that you. I guess you're doing decarboxylation, because that's what it sounded like. When you described having to look at different temperatures and hold it at different temperatures for different lengths of time. Am I understanding that properly?
No, this is where I can contribute to the conversation, because this is something that. So the thing about hemp is there's the phytocannabinoids with it, which is the CBD, CBG, CBC, and all that. All of those phytocannabinoids, they require heat to be kind of more bioavailable to the body, right? But then there's also these other half of hemp, like the polyphenols, the terpenes, phytochemicals, flavonoids, and things like that, where heat actually destroys it. So there's these two components that are completely opposite, and we need to find what is that fine line where we can activate one side of hemp, but then maintain the other side of hemp.
Wow.
So just to figure that out, the process right now is essentially just me looking at an industrial oven, and at 313 seconds, I make 2.7 degrees adjustment to the temperature. And then at like 212 seconds, I bring it down by 6.2 degrees. And I'm just doing this for hours. And how did I get to that process? Just a lot of trial and error and patience. It was like, it's definitely was. I banged my head on the wall a lot of times, but it worked out in the end. And we've been able to help many people with it. And the tough part is that when people hear hemp has been, the terminology for hemp has been just used as marketing terms for CBD product for so long. So whenever people hear hemp, they just relate it to like hemp oil, which is essentially just like a full spectrum hemp oil. So we are fighting that kind of stigma that hemp is CBD. So it is an uphill battle, but I mean, it's a battle I'm willing to fight, right? Because we are the first product of our kind where we can actually deliver the whole herb as a herbal supplement rather than just extracting bits and pieces of it and just calling it the herb. Because like the way I like to compare it is if we extracted potassium from an avocado and we put in some green food coloring, maybe we added some avocado flavoring, and we added some healthy fats, things like that. Is that concoction the same thing as eating an avocado? Probably not, right? Because first of all, although we know that there are hundreds of beneficial phytochemicals in the avocados, we probably don't even know. There's probably more. There's only 100 that has been discovered. So for example, there's phytochemical in avocados. I don't know off the top of my head the name, but then there's a phytochemical that actually fights cancer. So there's all these bits and pieces inside whole fruits and whole herbs that are just so beneficial. And there's no way we can perfectly perfectly mimic it to match what's in nature. And then
Yeah.
the results just come into stories like this, right? It's like you're living proof of the results of the work we put in, and all the other 8,000 people that have so far used KALM to against their own mental health struggles. That's what keeps me fueled and keeps me moving forward.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
I
Well,
wanted to do.
how long did it take you to come up with the current methodology that you're using?
So the thing is, I'm still improving it. So right
Ah,
now, if I had to say where we are in a scale of 0 to 100, with 100 being a perfect product, I would say right now I'm somewhere between 80 and 90. We're pretty close. And then the thing is, going from 0 to 50 is a lot easier, but then going from 60 to 70 is a lot harder, because once you get to that upper area, you're looking at like fraction of a percent improvement in between the process. So it gets a lot more expensive, since each test is hundreds of dollars, and a lot of time and a lot of materials wasted. So I would say I'm somewhere between the 80 and 90, and it's still an ongoing process. This process has, I think it's around 6 years now. Now,
Wow.
but I believe that great products can always get better. So I'm trying to get as close to 100% as possible. And I've never told this to the public, but some of the things I'm looking into is, I know the dry herbal powder can be a little bit difficult for some people. For example, some people who have more sensitive taste buds, or maybe the younger audience, or maybe the older audience, right? So I am looking into other delivery methods. And of course, capsules is one of them. I want to look into wellness shots. I want to look into a way to make it into like, to emulsify it with a type of fat. So maybe like some type of cream or milk, so that we can mix it into lattes. I have all these ideas, but
Ooh.
I think that's just the entrepreneur gene in me. I'm like, I want to do so many things, but there's only one of me. Like what? And I just have to stay focused and just take
Yeah.
things one step at a time. But if you give me some time, 5 years from now, KALM is just going to be a lot crazier than what it is now.
Oh, that is so cool. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and that is that's another thing that you really want to hear about a product like this, is that
Yeah.
it's not finished, it's getting better all the time. You're not willing to just settle and sit back on your haunches and say, oh
Yeah.
well, now I can just relax and make money.
Yeah.
And this is another one of the boxes that was checked when I looked into your reviews and things like that. Your dedication to what I would call a ministry. I mean, you
Yeah.
are a minister of health. You're a health minister of sorts here. You are reaching out and helping people all over the world, from what I understand, and that's just amazing. And it is a ministry. You're helping people to heal. You're helping people to think straight. You're on a mission from God, James. It's like the Blues Brothers. Did you ever see that movie?
The Blues Brothers, I have not, but
Oh Lord,
I believe so
classic.
that I do believe I'm on a mission. It's definitely, and I'm Christian too, so it probably came from God.
There you
But
go. All the
and
good
it's like,
stuff does.
yeah, and then it's like all this fuel, like the fire of my mission fueled for my own mental health journey, because it wasn't as long as yours, but then like I definitely struggled for like I've been on this journey for like 16 years, and like 8 of them were literally I was on rock bottom too. So I was falling into
That's
my own addictions with alcohol, prescription meds, and just kind of numbing my pain and just hanging out and just also partying, just trying to not think about real life, and I try to escape reality. And when everything settles, you find that you just dug yourself into a deeper hole, right? And at one point,
that's
and then
right.
I also did try to end my own life when I was younger. So it's all that negativity has, and coming out of it. and eventually turning my life around and coming out of it, it fuels me because I'm like, I know how much it hurts to be there. And I just want to help other people, pull as many people outside of this spiral of negativity as much as possible, because I've been there too. And I'm a single person right now, so I can only pull one person at a time. But that's what I do. Every day I wake up and then I go like, who can I help out today? And just do this day after day. And the small wins stack up.
Well, and clearly, you know, what you've just spoken about being fueled
Yeah.
by the hardships and everything,
Yeah.
that's got his fingerprints all over it. We do a
Mhm.
lot of times have to go through the valley of the shadow of death, and he gets us through to the other side. He's the good shepherd and all that good stuff.
Mhm.
And sometimes on the other side, he shows us how we can use what
Yeah.
we experienced in that valley to help others. And so
Mhm.
many times I've seen people that have gone through terrible, experiences. I've seen a lot of marriage ministries come out of really sad situations, with bad marriages, that some that never did heal. But then, later the person was put together with someone that it did work with, and then they were able, because they were equally yoked. And of course, this is an
Yeah.
important principle, I think, is to be equally yoked. And I think that's why a lot of marriages don't work, is because they don't pay attention to that. A lot of times people say, and I've made that mistake. Um,
Mhm.
you think that the person has potential, and that the person is that you think they're on the same tracks, maybe, and they're not, and you find out after you're married, and it's devastating. But those bad experiences, a lot of times they
Make it
come in.
stronger.
A lot of times they do. They come in to where you end up being someone who can help other people.
Mhm.
Um, so it's important, I think, if you are going through stuff, or if you've been through stuff and you're still trying to deal
Mhm.
with the fallout from it, to maybe explore what the Father in heaven might have in mind for how you can use that to help other people in the same situation. Because I think that
Mhm.
happens a lot. And it's
Mhm.
it's obviously happened with you, and I'm so grateful. It's sad that you had to go through that, but it is benefiting me a lot now. And
Mhm.
I'm sorry you went through it, but I sure am grateful.
If I think back, I wouldn't change a thing. My depression, my me hurting myself, I wouldn't change a thing. It made me to who I am today. I'm grateful for it, and it's but of course, if I was speaking to younger James, I'm sure he would say something different. But it's only, you can only say this in retrospect. And like and it kind of changed the way I think in life, and I think the way I think in life now is just so strengthening that, like, I still get hardships, I still have really rough.
Good.
I feel like for people like us who struggle with mental health, it never truly goes away. It might be something just how our brains are wired, or it's something that happened in the womb, something we cannot control, but it never truly goes away. But we become better at managing it and living our life despite having the anxiety, despite having the sadness and the worry and things like that. And it's the hardships has now made changed my mindset into thinking that now life is, anytime something bad happens, what can I learn from this? What happened? What brought me here? And it helps me analyze things so that I'm better prepared, so that future James will be better prepared in case something similar like this ever happens again. So life is just either wins or learning lessons. There's no such thing as a loss. Loss only happens when you give up. And I know for sure that I'm never going to give up. I'm
Well,
like,
that's
yeah,
awesome, and that's something else I can really relate to. I've always said, even before I got born again, I have never been a quitter. I mean,
mhm,
I might slow down. I
yeah,
might lie down for a while, but and just lay low. But I'm not going to quit, and I feel even more strongly about that now that I'm a believer, because, like I say, I'm trying
yeah,
to do His will. Um, But another thing I just want to interject about what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Yeshua taught us, he said, you will in this world, you will have troubles. And
Yeah.
I think part of that, as you say, is growth opportunities and learning opportunities. However, I do think it's also important that we learn how to do, for me, learning spiritual warfare is kind of important because we do have an enemy. And I think the enemy is making himself known more and more every day in what I think are the end times now. We see so much evil, so much really, really awful evil. And we know that prophecy says that in the end times, it's going to be like the days of Noah, which were described as, at that time, everybody had evil in their hearts, pretty much nothing but evil. And it's getting that way. And it's kind of scary, but there is a spiritual war going on that manifests in the physical. And it's important that we continue to fight the fight, I'm not real. I know it's not cool to bring politics into stuff, but I can't help it. And, I really hated Trump at one time, but I got to say, when that man stood up after he was shot and said, fight, 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 I mean, that just blew my mind. It was such an iconic moment that the world got to see how important it is not to let anything stop you or get you down, just to keep on going, because the fight is important. And, he says, and I hope it's all true. I want to believe it. It's looking good to me right now. I don't know, and again, I mean, I don't think less of anybody that isn't, and I'm still a registered Democrat, although, I'm not, I haven't voted that way in the last election. But to be honest, I can't, I couldn't help it when I saw that, and when I saw, so many things that he does seem to want to do the right thing. Now, I don't agree with everything he's doing, but it's so that just the moxie, the chutzpah of not giving up. Even when you have really taken a blow, a really scary. I mean, I can't imagine. I'm sure you saw the video. The AI videos of what happened, how close. If he would have turned his head that much, it was that close.
Yeah.
And it looked kind of supernatural. Now, I don't know. I mean, he could still turn out to be the Antichrist. I don't know. I hope not. But the thing is, I do admire that kind of get up and go, literally, and not being willing to quit, and persistence is really important. And that can come, you can get that from the Holy Spirit. And so, when you start to follow Yahweh and Yeshua's teachings, which are Yahweh's teachings, then you can have that Holy Spirit, and that Holy Spirit will help you to keep going. And it will also help you to learn from the awful things that you go through. So, of course, I don't always feel this way. I'm preaching to myself here. But I do get a lot of help in that way as well.
Yeah, I think persistence is definitely one of the most powerful tools in any goal you're achieving, whether that's physical health, mental health, career, finances, relationships, and things like that. Persistence is the key. And it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on. It doesn't matter what gender you are. Persistence is a necessity to hit big goals. And definitely having going spiritually can definitely help many people with the persistence, because it gives you the fuel. Because when you're on these journeys, there's long periods when it feels like the work you're putting in is just amounting to nothing. You're doing the actions, you're doing what people are telling you are the right things to do, but you're like, does this even work? Am I just wasting my time? Should I just quit and things like that? And at that time, you have to either figure out a way to convince yourself, yes, you need to stay on this path despite not seeing the actions, or you can pull that energy from God. In this case, right?
There's a supernatural component out there that's available. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I want to I want to take a step back on some of the symptoms that you may have been experiencing during your mental health, just because people experience depression and anxiety differently. I've spoken with, I think, maybe around 8,000 people, and there's just been 8,000 different symptoms, right?
Yeah.
How did your symptoms come out for you?
Well, like I said, I mean, looking back and gleaning from what my mom saw when I was growing up, when we started looking at the possibility that I might be on the spectrum, there were a lot of things as a child that happened. Like, I couldn't really relate to my peers. Now, part of that was probably because I wasn't around a lot of other children. My mom was raising me on her own, and I was mostly around her. And she didn't baby talk to me, and she said I was always very articulate, even as a child. And
I think
so,
you are. You're very good at storytelling. You're very good at like when you were telling me your story, you didn't lose my attention for a second. I was just like, okay, what happens next? I didn't mean to.
No, that's okay.
Yeah,
that helped to hear that. Every now and then I need a little boost. It does help, because sometimes I wonder how it's going, because I really can't tell. I'm a lot. I mean, like I say, even when I was a child, I'm inside my head a lot. I mean, I'm in there, and it's a weird place in there. There's a lot going on. I have a lot of what a lot of times some psychiatric groups will call monkey mind, where you feel like your thoughts are jumping from branch to branch to branch, and that's that ADHD type of thinking. But then, like I say, sometimes it's laser focus. But I didn't really for example, my mom said when I first started going to elementary school, she went to talk to my teacher, because they had those usual conferences with your teacher throughout the year. And the teacher said, my mom said, how does she do out there, on the playground and with the other kids and stuff? And she said, oh, she does okay, but mostly she just likes to watch the other kids. She doesn't really interact with them all that much, And so, it wasn't real worrisome to my mom. But then, later on, she got me into Girl Scouts, to try to get me to, get engaged with other children and stuff. But I always was more comfortable with adults. And, I thought a lot of kids were kind of boring, because they just really, a lot of times they didn't know what I was talking about, So, yeah, that was the beginning of all of that. But then too, there are some other things besides the exposure to toxic chemicals and stuff, and the career that I had. Also, when I was a child, I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not, but back in the day, way long ago, there was a over-the-counter product for putting on wounds called mercurochrome.
I've never heard of it.
What does it sound like? What does it sound like it's got in it?
Say it one more time. Mercury? Or
yes, it had mercury in it.
Okay.
And you were supposed to, it came with like a little plastic stick that you dipped it down into the little bottle, and then you just smeared it onto the wound.
It's for wound care, like open wounds? Okay.
Right. And so you're putting mercury into an open wound. Now you can't get that stuff anymore. which
Yeah.
is wonderful because people were using it like crazy back then.
Mhm.
She loved it because it was red. And, mercury is red, the element, when it's in its liquid state. Well, anyway, it was red.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
she would take it in, and it actually came out like a dye. It would stick on your, when you painted it on the wound or on your skin, it'd be red for a while, with that color.
Yeah.
Well, she liked to paint Mickey Mouse faces on my boo-boos. And so she would just put a boatload of this stuff on any kind of boo-boos. And so I was getting
Yeah.
Mickey Mouse faces painted on me with mercurochrome all the time. But now that's not the worst of it. The worst, and this was like from being a little tiny kid, she started putting that mercurochrome on me.
Yeah.
And I started when I got older, I guess maybe about 3 or 4, I started getting chronic strep throat. And it was really bad. And I would get it like, 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 times a year. It was terrible.
What? Wow.
Yeah. And I don't know why. And amazingly, I still have my tonsils. But see, she dated this doctor at one point, and she told him, about that it had been recommended to her by someone else that she get my tonsils out. And he said, no, you should keep her tonsils as long as you can. So I still have them. There are actually pits. They look like the surface of the moon. Okay. It's like pits from all of those illnesses that just tore my tonsils up. But here's the thing. The point is, she got the bright idea that she should put mercurochrome on my tonsils.
Oh, this is back in the days where you can't just Google things if it's safe. And
so
okay, continue.
she would paint this in the back of my throat on my tonsils, and so I was swallowing mercury, and it did kind of kill the pain.
Yeah.
But mercury, do you know the story of where the expression Mad Hatter came from?
I feel like I've heard that before. Now, I don't know much about mercury, but I just know that you can die from mercury poison from eating too much fish, right? When you eat like the big fish. So I just know that mercury is not good for the body. But for the audience, can you let us know why mercury is bad, I guess?
Yeah, well, first let me tell the audience what
go ahead.
Mad Hatter came from.
Yeah.
Okay. They, back in the day, again, when they really didn't know any better, just like they didn't know any better, they used to paint radium dials on watches with literal radioactive radium, because it would light up in the dark. It was, it was fluorescent in the dark. And so they thought that was really cool. The ladies that were painting those, they used these little tiny brushes with a point on them. And, after they painted a little bit, they would put it in their mouth and lick it to bring it to a point again and dip it back in the radium. They did not know that they were eating radioactive material. And of course, a lot of them got bone cancer because that's what usually comes from radioactive exposure like that. Now, mercury, on the other hand, they used it at one time. Hat makers used it to stiffen the hats into the form that they, like a top hat, they would stiffen it with a mercury type of concoction. And of course, they were breathing mercury all the time. That's one reason if they remove mercury from your fillings, they have to put a dental dam, and they have to have like something that suctions it, because the vapors are very highly toxic as well. So what it does is it goes straight to your brain. Okay.
I remember the story now, but continue. Yeah.
It does. So it is really hard. It's a heavy metal. And it really has an effect on the brain that is toxic. It kills cells, and it modifies cells and all that sort of thing. It can cause cancer, or it can just, kill so many cells or modify them to the point where you die because your brain can't function properly. So mercury poisoning is really scary. And I started I'm pretty sure I started getting that early on. And
Yeah.
I think that combined with the, and it may have even induced, because, heavy metals toxicity, they do believe there is a link between that and autism, which is why it's kind of crazy, if you ask me, to put certain heavy metals into, things that you stick in your arm or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Well, is this like mercury in its pure form? Because, example, there's like hydrogen, but then if you do H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, and two hydrogens, it becomes water, right?
Right.
So I know, like, when sometimes some chemicals are like chemically bond with other ones, it can go from toxic to non-toxic. Now,
Right.
was this like mercury in its toxic form, or just or maybe like a non-toxic version of it? Like when you had the little wound cleaning one,
the mercurochrome. Okay,
mercurochrome.
so sometimes you can get away with binding
Yeah.
an atom with another atom that would be
Mhm.
toxic otherwise. Mercury is pretty much toxic no matter what kind of combination it's in.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
here's the thing now, this might just kind of make a better picture in your mind. If you want to see mercury in its original atomic form, look at a
Mhm.
mercury thermometer. That silver stuff in the
Mhm.
thermometer, this is why they don't make very many of them anymore, is highly toxic. And if you break a mercury thermometer, you need to be really super careful to get every bit of it up. It will adsorb through your skin into your
Ooh.
bloodstream. And so, yeah, now, but the mercurochrome, yeah, it wasn't elemental mercury, but
Yeah.
it was still very, very toxic. Yeah.
Yeah. It's even if it was just like a point something percent, it's not something you want to intentionally put into your body, right? It's definitely. And so, like, it
And
seems like
right
the
next to
heavy.
your brain on your tonsils, I mean, that was
Mhm.
right there. No stretch for it to get to the brain, so
Yeah.
I have done some detox
Mhm.
with EDTA. Um, and, I haven't done the IVs because they're terribly expensive. And I don't really like needles, especially lying there with one in my arm for a long time. That doesn't appeal
Mhm.
to me. So the functional medicine doctor that I went to that tested me and found, all of those heavy metals in my system, suggested that I do EDTA suppositories, which I'm not real keen on either, and are still very expensive, not as expensive by far. But so I've done a little bit of that, but I couldn't really afford to do, like he told me I really needed to do EDTA suppositories for about 2 or 3 years. I got maybe a total of 6 months in, but it's like $400 a month, and that
Yeah.
was when my mom was alive. She was helping me get that. And, she was a retired school teacher, James. So, but when she was living with me, we were able to combine our incomes and do a few things that I can't do
Yeah.
now, but, so I don't know. And again, like you said, testing is very expensive. And so I haven't tested, so I don't know how much of it I still have. But these are
Yeah.
things that a lot of people haven't been tested for and don't realize. I think there are probably a whole lot more people with heavy metals toxicities that don't know it,
It
and
can also come from the food. I think
yeah, oh,
depending on where you get what food you eat.
absolutely. Yep.
I've also heard like it can come from. It's not just the heavy metals too, because there's like pesticides and there's also like
Yes.
toxic chemicals. So if you like live near a park or like a golf course, something like that, they're gonna spray pesticides to
Yep.
keep the pests out, and then all of that airborne stuff, it could affect the neighborhoods around. So it's and the thing is, the damage from these things, it's like, it's not like, oh, one day you wake up and
Right.
you feel ill. It's just a slow accumulation, and
It
by the time you,
bioaccumulates. This is something a lot of people don't understand is, so
yeah.
many of the toxins we're exposed to bioaccumulate, and
Mhm.
over time, you can't, they don't just come out of your body naturally. They get into the
Mhm.
cells and they hang out. And then when you have more, it just packs it on top. And then one
Mhm.
day you're going to reach a threshold, and it may start bothering you a little
Yeah.
bit before you reach that threshold. But when you reach it,
Mhm.
all of a sudden you've got some really major issue now that you
Mhm.
don't know really what the source of it is. And um, it's just terrible. And I
Yeah.
really I do think, again, back to politics, but it's just amazing what's happening right now with Robert Kennedy and what he's trying to do. I think it's been a long time coming, and
Mm.
he has made some changes in our food. Which, by the way, having had a chemical engineering degree, I have studied up quite a bit on some other things that chemies do that I didn't do. I was on the good guy's side because I was an environmental, basically, specialist.
Yeah.
But a lot of chemical engineers work for companies to figure out ways to enhance products. And in fact, what you're doing is chemical engineering on your product. Did you
Yeah.
know you're a chemical engineer? You are. And it's so, but here's the thing. A lot of those people have nefarious intentions when they are doing their chemical engineering. And a really, really horrible and obvious example is the tobacco industry. And I think pretty much everybody knows now that a lot of the chemical engineers that worked for the tobacco industry were doing things like, curating chemicals to add to the tobacco to make it more addictive. Okay. And
Mhm.
we are finding out now, I don't know if you've ever seen any of Dr. Artis has been doing a lot of interesting videos on this sort of
Yeah.
thing, but he has come up with, and Harvard recently came up with a study that said that it's really not nicotine that's so addictive and so harmful. It's all the stuff they added to it. And the really scary part, James, the tobacco industry has they've been squashed down quite a bit over the
Yeah.
last many years, and
Well,
it's
then they
not as
bought the candy industry, which is
well.
also addicting.
That's
But that's another rabbit
exactly
hole. Let's park that thought.
well. That's what I was getting ready to say, actually. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you what's really scary is they got a lot of those chemical engineers from the tobacco industry to work on the food. And have you ever heard of something called the bliss point?
I have not.
Okay, Google it, because
But
what you find out is
yeah.
chemical engineers are given the task to add components to these different food products and then test the results and see if they can get people to, the old advertisement that said, bet you can't eat just one. Well, that is
Yeah.
literally their goal, is to addict you, to make it where you can't stop eating it when you start. And they
Mhm.
are literally putting stuff in the food to make that happen. And
And then
that's
that's
one
the
of
bliss
these
point, I'm assuming. Is that like the
bliss,
point of
bliss.
bliss?
It's the point where, your
Is that you
eyes
have
roll
to get
back in your
everything?
head and you can't stop.
It's just okay, so this is so crazy because I was just listening to a documentary yesterday, and
Mhm.
the documentary said that drug dealers are doing the same thing with drugs. They're adding bits of fentanyl because fentanyl is when you do fentanyl once, you're instantly hooked. So they're doing that with all these other drugs, and I heard this yesterday, and now you're telling me that we're doing this legally in the food
Yeah,
industry. So I'm like, whoa, that's kind of like what drug dealers do.
it's exactly,
Yeah.
and it really, it's kind of scary. There are so
It
many
is.
things we see out there. And again, there is spiritual warfare going on. And I think that the spirit realm influences people
Hmm.
to do things that further their agenda, which
Yeah.
is to steal, kill, and destroy humankind.
Hmm.
And so, again, this is another reason it's a good idea to have spiritual
Yeah.
coverage, and to try to, another tool that I find that has been really helpful for me. We're admonished in Scripture to guard our eyes and our eye gates and our ear gates, and and what we eat, what we say, what we put in our mouths, probably what we breathe, the air and everything. But here's the thing I was going to say. Of course, I do try to be careful with what I eat. I try to, I've got a water filter. I've got an Alexa Pure water filter. I like that. I do like reverse osmosis, but it's kind of a hassle. And but anyway, so the water and the food and everything. However, there's another thing, our eyes and ears. And so I try to make it a point where, for many years now, since I got born again, I've tried to be really careful about what I allow to come through my screen into my home.
Mm.
It's almost like a waterfall. When my mom was alive, she had this thing, and it was just so hard for her. She was literally addicted to a couple of specific soap operas.
Yeah.
And I would walk in the room, and I had not been around those I had my cable cut off for the TV back in like 2010. And then when she moved in 2015, I was so used to not having it. But when I had to turn it back on for her because she couldn't see her soaps. So we turned it on, and I would come in there, and you could feel it in the room. It was an atmosphere, you could feel it. And I was like, Mother, why are you watching that? It's so bad. I said, it's like a waterfall just spewing filth into the house, And because I gave her the whole upstairs, and I lived downstairs. I still live down there because it's partially underground, which something else that does for me is it protects me from electromagnetic fields, which I have some hypersensitivity to. And so I got to where I really liked living down there and just stayed down there even after she passed. But I would come upstairs and I'd be like, whoa, what's going on up here? It feels like there's a lot of stuff up here that shouldn't be here, And it was those stupid soaps, because she didn't listen to bad music or anything like that. Those soaps were it. Now, I'll tell you the other thing she listened to all the time that was bad, and it was just coming through the screen. The news. She was addicted to the news, and it would just wear me out. I would sit down and watch it with her for a while, and it would just bum me so bad, So these are things that can talk about anxiety. Turn off the news, for goodness sake, unless it's something good, and there is some good stuff, but there's a lot of scary stuff too. So
but then good news never sells, so they're never going to air good news. They're only going to air bad news, and they're going to exaggerate news to make it worse than it actually is. And also, I think the human brain just craves novelty, right? Something new. And then that's why TikTok and Instagram Reels, it's just so addicting. And then I guess the soap operas back in the days was the TikToks of the time, right? It's like, oh, what's the next episode? What is Dr. Mark? I'm just saying a random name, by the way. Going to do with Susan, right?
That's exactly what it was. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was just dreadful, and it got worse over the years because early on TV, they were censored pretty closely. You didn't see people in bed on your TV. You didn't see. You had to go to a special naughty theater to see stuff like that back in the day.
Yeah.
But now, it's just, it was part of her soaps. And I was shocked because, like, in just those 5 years that I had not watched anything on regular TV, when I started seeing what they were putting in the soaps, I was like, oh my goodness, that can't be. How are they doing that? And now really anything goes,
Yeah, it's a lot of bad. So I'm not gonna say like the internet is bad, but then there's a lot of good with the internet. Well, as technology advances, there's a lot of good side, but then there's this equal amount of bad that came with it, with like pornography and the tips of fingers for young kids and things like that, and just like the constant comparison. I don't think the comparison of when I say comparison, or when people say comparison, people think, oh, it's like, oh, I want to look like that person. But it's not that you want to look like that person, but then now you're given this artificial image of what life is supposed to look like, what success is supposed to look like, what relationship is supposed to look like, and what your career is supposed to look like, what your morning routine is supposed to look like. And the thing is, rather than you trying to figure out for yourself, I think this is what's important to me. I think this is what success looks to me. I think this is what a healthy relationship looks like. You're comparing your life to this fictional life that sells easy, and then of course everything is over exaggerated, and then
Oh
your
yeah.
life seems pale and dull and depressing in comparison.
Yeah.
And even if you may not think like this, you're slowly brainwashing yourself. That is what life is supposed to look like. My life
Right.
sucks. That's a good life. And then after hours a day, doing that for hours a day, for weeks and months at a time, it can definitely take a huge toll on your mental health.
Absolutely. It's so much like,
Yeah.
really, I mean, it's a lot like, it's a type of porn that we're seeing,
Mhm.
because it's a lie. Because, I mean, pretty much everybody knows now porn, when you watch porn, you're not seeing what the people really look like. Nobody really looks like that because they have done stuff, to the pictures of the people. They've photoshopped the videos and stuff and
Yeah.
CGI and things like that.
Yeah.
But they're doing that with everything now. It's a lie. Everything
Yeah.
we're seeing, it seems like, is a lie.
Everything is
And so
fabricated.
you see people, posting all of these wonderful, oh, I went on this great vacation. Oh, and it just looks like their life is fabulous. But if you really saw what was going on in their life, you would realize they are
Yeah.
doing worse than you probably. So yeah, the comparison thing is really bad news. And talk about something that will increase your anxiety. That's one of them.
Yeah.
And so guarding your eyes and being careful about what are you letting in? What are you, I just
Mhm.
the other day, I had kind of like a little revelation that, I was thinking about the fact that we, well, I read something that said that, you need to take charge, well, of course, scripture says, bring every thought captive to Messiah. And
Uh-huh.
so, these things influence our thoughts. And so when you feel your thoughts going into a bad direction, you've got to bring it captive. And so what I was thinking about that is I started visualizing like, okay,
Mm.
there's like, I'm up on top of this little hill. My brain is up here on my shoulders, and here comes this little, like a little car or something up the hill. And it's just loaded with bad stuff that it's like a little train, and it's a train of thought, and here it comes, and it's got all this bad stuff on it. And I just start now. I've tried to, because I've been trying to figure out, how do you bring every thought captive, So I started thinking, well, maybe that's one way, is that when you see that train coming with loaded with demons hanging out the window and stuff, you just say, all right, I don't want that train to come up here, and I definitely don't want it to come up here. And then, you fall in, especially like people like me, I fall into rumination if I'm not careful. And then I'm stuck on that
Mhm.
thought, and I can't get it out of my head. And I just go further and further with it. And I get down really in the dumps. So what you got to do is, when you see it coming, you think, well, I want to knock that thing off my hill. I don't want it getting up into my brain and getting running
Yeah.
away with my thoughts. And so I just start praying, Father, would you take your big toe and kick that thing off of me? Because
Yeah.
otherwise I'm going to go there, And these are like things, that have to do with usually have to do with some of the traumas that I have experienced. And, I'll
Mhm.
start thinking about somebody that hurt me or did something, and it's just like, it's so hard for me to get it out of my head. But if you can
Mhm.
catch it before it gets up there and climbs in, you're good. But again, triggers come from the TV, from the internet. And yeah, the internet is just like anything. It's like, well, like scripture says, the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money
Not
itself.
money itself.
And
Yeah.
so, when you start loving something that
Mhm.
you are using for the wrong reasons, you're in idolatry, basically.
Uh,
And so when you start loving the stuff you're seeing on the internet, like porn or like the news, the bad news, and somehow or another that just, you just latch on to it and you can't let go. Um, you're going into idolatry, and when you go into that, we know scripture says this is wrong.
mhm.
It opens the doors. Now see, this is the thing about spiritual warfare that I think is important, because I was in Wicca for so
Oh,
long.
Shalom.
Yeah.
You got cut off for 20 seconds. You said spiritual warfare is important and you got cut off. Can you say it one more time, please?
Okay. So spiritual warfare is really important because
Uh-huh.
a lot of times we can see ourselves going into these wrong directions, and when we do,
Mhm.
because I was involved in Wicca, I know that there are ways that you can open doors to the demonic realm. And
Really?
well, yeah.
What does that mean? Again, before, because when you said that, I got an image, but I'm pretty sure my image is wrong. Because so what does that mean? Like opening doors, like inviting a demon out from hell, or like putting a demon into like a body, or what does that entail?
Well, okay. So, all right. First of all, when it comes to like
Yeah,
possession and stuff like that,
yeah,
that's not it. It really, I mean, yeah, you don't want to get possessed, but it's not
yeah.
likely if you're filled with the Holy Spirit. However, that doesn't mean you can't be influenced
Okay.
by
Mhm.
demons. So, you can have demonic influence, and that can come in because you've opened doors. Now, some of the things you can do to open doors, you can have objects in your home that have been cursed, that will open that
Mm.
door. You can do things like, well, foul language can open doors, unclean lips. Okay.
Okay.
If you just cuss up a storm all the time, demons love that. And it's
Right.
an invitation. It's like, but there are other things that are much more hardcore than that. I mean, like, I don't know. Well, like I said, if you have your TV on and you just let it run through the day and you let all these ads go on, I don't think
Mhm.
people realize how much witchcraft and magic with a K is used to create advertisements, because it's manipulation. This is what witchcraft is. It's manipulation. It's getting
Got it.
people to do what you want them to do for your purposes. Okay. And so when you allow that to come into your home through the screen,
Mm.
it's an open door. Your television or your radio or whatever it is, what music you're listening to, it might have, don't get me started. There's some ministries that are dedicated to exposing, the music scene and what kinds of magic. I mean, there's so many people in the music scene now that are just purely satanic, and they don't make any bones about it. They're
Got it.
clearly satanic, and they are putting it in the music, and they are using a lot of their music in ads. But even if they don't, there's stuff that they can do. You can manipulate the spiritual realm on the demonic side, invite them in, and turn them loose on people. And if they're not protected and they let it in through whatever means, they can come under a lot of attack. And a lot of times, some of the attacks people are experiencing, they don't realize that they've actually rolled a red carpet out for that. They've
Mm. Because they're
actually,
just like doom scrolling, and then they just happen to get fed that piece of information that maybe it negatively impacts their life. Like it might be some
sure,
false health advice that they go like, oh, I need to start doing this, and then that health advice, for example, the mercury wound care, like let's say they saw that on TikTok, and they're like, oh, maybe I need to go and start doing that, right? So you
yeah,
just you're being prone to manipulation, or I guess not always manipulation, but being fed bad info that can negatively impact your quality of life.
Yep.
Okay, got it. We're on the same page now. Okay.
You're spot on. Yeah, that's it.
Mhm.
And it's really a simple, a simple equation. You just don't want to, you don't want to invite any of that in. And it's interesting because if you really delve into that, you can find that like a lot of the old, the old scary stories about vampires, like the stories about vampires, for example. One of the myths that goes with the vampire saga is that if you invite them into your home, they can come in. But if they're not invited, they can't come in. Okay. And you'll see this in a lot of movies. If you watch, I used to watch that stuff. I don't watch it anymore, but I used to be a big nut for horror films and stuff, which opened a lot of doors back then. Okay. And that's probably another reason I ended up in the Wicca stuff. But anyway, the point is that old myth is based on some truth. Because like I said, if you invite this stuff in, it can come in. If you don't, it can't. Okay. So we have to be super careful about what we invite into our lives. And we invite with things, again, like, what we say, what we listen to, what we allow in our homes. So that's another way to approach achieving wellness, is to start really riding herd on those kinds of things and just not let them in. Don't let them in.
I think you're spot on. I think when it comes to your wellness journey, I like to boil. People like to overcomplicate things. I like to boil it down to two things. One is you add on habits that improve your wellness, like getting some morning sun, getting your walks in, exercise, getting tikva, uh, and like getting your scoop of calm. There's a lot of things that can help improve your mental health, right? But then the second part of it, which is crucial, you need both sides, is you need to remove the bad. So
Yes.
you can't be adding things on and continuing your bad habits, because at that point you're kind of wasting your efforts, right? You want to at the same time add and at the same time remove. And
Yep.
the journey is just constantly just going back and forth between the two and making minor adjustments. Now, this brings me to my next question. So it seems like you've been on this mental health journey for way longer than me, and
I'm way older than you too, but yeah, I
I thought
did.
we're the
I
same
spent more time. I spent more time down and out
age.
than you have the ability to do because you've already gone through yours. But yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I thought we're the same age. I know,
Oh,
but I was gonna say, like, so along the journey, it definitely seems like you've stacked on a lot of tools that, I mean, life is never going to be perfect, but it's a lot better than where it was before, right? And then some of the tools you mentioned is going spiritually, prayer, and you said you not the IV, but then there's this certain detox that you mentioned, and I want to talk about calm now. When you so calm, just like everything else in life, different people get it feels different for different people, right? So
yeah.
when you took calm, how did calm feel like for you?
You know, I know I've read a
Yeah,
lot of the testimonials, and I know some people feel it right away. Some people don't feel it for sometimes a couple of weeks or more. Um,
yeah.
I felt it immediately, almost. I mean, within half an hour of taking it. But I took it when I was in the midst of some pretty difficult episodes, and I
Mhm.
was feeling very anxious, and I was so glad to have something to try, to knock it out, that instead of having to take the alprazolam. So I thought, well, as soon as it came in the mail, I grabbed it and I was watching. I was tracking it and making sure that I got it out of the mailbox because I didn't want it to deteriorate in the
Yeah,
mailbox or anything. So I ran right up there and got it, and I took, a regular scoop for the first time, and I was in anxiety right then, when I took it. And it was a
Mhm.
half an hour later, I felt much better. And of course, that made me feel even better because I was so excited that it was working that fast, And so, yeah, that was my experience. And then, of course, I continued to use it after that. And I was using it daily. I did stop using it daily about a week ago because I was starting to run low.
Uh-huh.
And then, I just recently ordered my next batch along with the Zen Body. And so I'm really
Uh-huh.
excited about that. It's supposed to get here Friday, so it's coming soon.
Okay.
But I still have just a little bit of the mind hack left, and it still works. Now it doesn't. I don't always feel it as much because I
Mhm.
think for a couple of reasons.
Mhm.
Unless I'm in the midst of anxiety when I take it, I will feel it right away. But
Mhm.
since I was taking it daily for a while, I really wasn't having any significant episodes. And when I started feeling one coming on, I took a little extra,
Yeah.
and um, so and it worked every time. So my experience has been just phenomenal. I have been so happy with it. And
Yeah.
again, I mean, that doesn't mean I don't have bad days still, especially because of the chronic pain, which is why I'm getting the Zen Body. But
Yeah.
it has been a significant improvement. And so what it feels like is it just feels like relief. It goes away for the most part. And I'm able to function better and to think clearer and to relax a little more, you know.
Yeah.
I do still have, I mean, look, I'm still pretty lonely and I'm a little bit scared, like I said, being on my own here and being, getting older and having more health issues.
Mhm.
But this looks like the best tool I've added in a long time. In fact, really, I can't really think of anything that has made this much difference, except for the alprazolam, which
Yeah.
has such a downside. I don't even.
Yeah.
Yeah, although it has saved my bacon a few times. When I just really nothing else would work for a really bad anxiety attack, and
Yeah.
so. But the side effects and the danger of getting that vascular dementia,
Yeah.
not worth it if there's any other option. So, and there is. So I'm so, I just really, because it is answered prayer. I have been just really seeking for Yahweh to send me some way to, not have to take the pharmakia. And so I really believe this is answered prayer.
That's awesome, and we're just getting started on the journey. It only goes up, and it's just like you said. I wish there was a miracle pill that's just gonna wash all of our negative emotions, but it doesn't work like that. It's just to help us soften the blows, right, and make the days a little bit more tolerable. And so just like you said, our anxiety levels vary day by day. It's just part of human
Yes.
emotions. Some days are worse than others for no reason. It could just be the weather
Right.
outside. Maybe we slept
Right.
weird,
Oh
right?
yeah. The
And
weather
then
makes a big difference.
yeah, and on those days is I think that's the beauty of calm is that you can adjust the strength accordingly. So on like just like you said, on the harder days you can take a little bit more. On better days you can take a little bit less, and just kind of go with the flow. You don't have to wait until your next refill day and worry about running out. All right.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I think too that it's just you know, it's so important to
Hmm.
have a tool like this that does not have all of those side effects and that actually
Yeah.
has, well, I mean, my understanding is that a lot of the components are things that are known to be good for all different aspects of our health,
Yeah.
um, including, protection from cancer, and things
Yeah.
like that. So, gosh, there's really no downside that I can see, and I was really worried about it. Now I have tried CBD, but it really didn't. It never really. it really didn't ever help all that much. And of course, because of the association with the ones that have the THC in them and everything, that I think that makes a lot of people nervous. It made me a little bit nervous at first, but one reason is that when I used to indulge in marijuana, I couldn't smoke it without getting drunk first, because I'm one of those people that I just talk about, man, that triggered my anxiety. I was so paranoid. I was so the first time I ever smoked pot with that friend of mine from school that was the drug dealer. She was the first one to get me to smoke pot with her. And we were sitting, it's terrible. We were sitting in her dad's car. She lived on Treasure Island in Florida, and it wasn't far from where I lived. And so we were sitting in her dad's car looking out at the horizon on the beach. And we were just smoking and smoking. And she says, now, most people don't get high the first time they smoke pot. But
What?
She said the most people don't get high the first time they smoke pot. And actually, I've actually heard that from a lot of people. Oh, I didn't get high the first time I smoked, She said, but you're going to get high. We're going to sit here till you're high. And I said, okay. So, and I had never been drunk or anything. I was in 7th grade. Okay. And so we're sitting there and we're smoking, and we smoked, I guess, maybe 2 joints. And she says, you feeling anything? And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And so she says, well, I'm going to pack a bowl. So she gets a pipe out and she starts packing it up. And while she was doing that, I was looking out the windshield at the horizon, and all of a sudden it was like either the horizon moved from where it was to up here, which I can't really explain. It's just, that's what it looked like to me. It just felt like either my head or the horizon moved from where it was to up and over. And I was like, whoa. And she goes, what? And I said, I think I'm high. And she goes, all right. And I said, no, it's not all right. I said, don't pack that bowl. I said, this is creepy. I don't like it. And she goes, no. She says, you're just paranoid. And I said, don't say that word. It made me so paranoid. So I was, really, really, I was kind of scared because, some people have what's called paradoxical reactions to different types of substances. So,
definitely.
Yeah. So there's something I've discovered, back when I was trying all different kinds of substances, that things that were supposed to be affect the GABA system, in your brain, those things I have opposite. So those things are usually supposed to make you feel kind of drunk and stuff. There was a particular drug, can't remember the name of it right now, but anyway, it was something people took a lot back then in the 70s, and I don't know if they do anymore or not because I don't hang with them. But the thing about it is, I took this stuff and it was supposed to make you feel relaxed and drunk, and I was like, well, that's cool. I like getting drunk, And I went into a terrible anxiety attack. It was awful. So I do have, and even there's some kind of an over-the-counter thing that is some kind of herb or something that people take. Anyway, but it's another one that works on the GABA system, and it makes me absolutely super anxious. So, I was really afraid that KALM might turn out to have some kind of, effect like that. And it was such a relief that it didn't, but everybody's different. Everybody's body is different. And, I never really did like pot all that much unless I was really drunk. If I was really drunk, I loved it. It was and just act stupid. Like we used to say back then, I got stupid,
Yeah.
Too accurate. But, all these things are different for different people, and so you do have to be careful. But when you hit on something that most people are having, and if you said what, like over 8,000 people?
So far 8,000. I think it's like 8,800, something like that.
Wow.
That's how many people we've helped out so far. Yeah,
that's awesome. So that's
Well, did you get
definitely
any?
a good sign.
Pardon?
That's definitely a good sign. That many
Oh
people.
yeah. We the world. We gotta add maybe like 6 more zeros to tackle the world. So
There you go. There you go.
uh,
Well, you've got so many wonderful, your reviews, they're not just good. And, you've got hardly any bad reviews, and they mostly have stuff to do with things that don't really have to do with the product. And I think
yeah,
there were only like 2 or 3 that I saw when I went to
yeah.
Trustpilot. And I did go to
Oh
Trustpilot before I bought the
yeah.
product, and I was like blown away. I was like, now you just don't see this many reviews that are over the top. I mean, they weren't just, yeah, it was pretty good. You're like, wow, really
It's
enthusiastic feedback.
it's a real story behind every review. Like you can tell, like it's a real person, and like because I ask people, I'm like, hey, would you be like, I'm a small company, would you be cool like leaving us a review? And then like sometimes they leave like the most heartwarming stories, and I'm like, oh my god, I love you guys so much, and it really
Yeah,
helps a lot.
that's got to
Did
make
you
it.
did you experience like any side effects at all from Calm? I know some people sometimes they go like, oh, I got uh, a bit of a dry mouth for the first few days, something like that. But did you experience anything?
No, and that was another thing I was going to mention is not
Mhm.
only did I have really bad problems with marijuana, with anxiety, but it gave me the munchies, something awful.
Yeah.
And I was really afraid of that because I have battled binge eating for most of my life, and it's still an
Mhm.
issue. I'm really working on it right now. Um, but anyway, the point is there was none of that, and I can't say that and I was aware of the possibility of and of course with marijuana, the dry mouth was a big deal,
Mhm.
and so I was concerned that that might be an issue, but it wasn't. But I will say that I have been working extra hard on making sure that I'm hydrated really well.
Yeah.
Since I started taking it. Before that, I was already working on that because I had like a low something on my blood tests came back that indicated that something with my kidneys was a little bit off, and that and so my doctor said you need to make sure you're hydrating enough. So I've been
Okay.
actively doing that. So I don't know if that prevented it or what. I will also say, I'm not crazy about the taste either, but I will tell you what I do.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of tricks that I use. When I take it in the
Oh.
morning, I've got
Mhm.
these little vitamin. I've got methylated B12. I have the MTHFR DNA anomaly, and so I take methylated B12, and it comes in um, like a little mint type of thing, and it's kind of got a cherry flavor. So I always wait until I've taken the calm, and then I pop my B12, and it just my mouth is fine, and I just taste that. Then the other thing that I do if it's not in the morning, if it's if I'm taking it extra later in the day or before bed, I've got these really cool little mints that are um, they're Ayurvedic. They've got Ayurvedic herbs in them and stuff, and
Mhm.
it helps with coughs. And I mean they're teeny tiny, but they're delicious. They're almost kind of like a licorice flavor, and so I'll pop one of those in, and it's immediately takes care of any flavor that I'm not really wanting to taste. It's not a horrible taste, but it's just not.
Yeah. Mhm. It's like it's not gonna taste like a well, what's a food that everyone likes? Because I was gonna say kimchi, but that's because I'm Korean.
I like
It's not
kimchi
gonna taste like a
too.
piece of. It's not gonna taste like a piece of steak, right?
Right,
It's
right.
gonna taste herbally. It has that earthy taste, but
Yeah,
sometimes you just can't have everything in life. You just gotta make a
that's
little bit
right.
of concession.
Yeah, but that's very, very mild,
Yeah, yeah.
and even if I don't, you know, have something handy to pop in my mouth right after, it's not that bad, and you can pretty much drink enough water to wash it
Yeah,
out. So
cool.
there's really no downsides except for, I mean,
Mhm.
it's not free. If it was free, that would be
Yeah,
better, but you can't do that, and so. I accept
Mhm.
that. It's just the way things are. And I think that, it's definitely worth it. It's
Yeah.
definitely worth it.
For everyone watching, I haven't been paid since it's been over a year now. I haven't been paid working on this company at all since it started. So it's
Wow.
just
You're taking a
um
loss. Yeah, you're taking a loss.
every dollar goes back into either helping someone else um that needs help with the costs, or it goes back into research, or goes back into improving the product. Uh, but yeah, and then
Well,
I do put in my things.
you'll hit a threshold at some point. You'll hit a threshold where you're going to start.
Yeah, and then
That's the way it is with
I'll
any
be,
business, really. Yeah.
I'm gonna say it's not gonna be like this forever. I'm gonna definitely start paying myself soon. I'm gonna be paying myself $20 an hour, so it's gonna be.
That's
I'm
a
just gonna
bargain.
be yeah, just so I can continue paying my rent once my savings reaches zero. But definitely, yeah, I do get the price points being a problem, and I wish it was lower. Like I want it to be lower. It's the price isn't there just because like I'm doing some crazy margins and things like that. It's
Right.
literally just because as a small company, like everything's super expensive, and just the raw materials of getting something so high quality where you can actually feel the difference on your first scoop
Right.
comparable to a benzo, it's very expensive, right? And the process itself, just the cooking process, is just very labor intensive. And but my promise is that as I do get bigger, I'm definitely going to make things more affordable for more people. But right now, if it's this is the price where it is where it needs to be so that the company can still function. Because
Right.
if the company dies, then like that's bad for everyone, right?
Yes.
So
Very. Very. I
yeah.
applaud you for the way that you're doing this, and I think
Mhm.
that I had a small business back in
Yeah.
2008 for a couple of years. And, when you do try to do a small business, you learn a lot of stuff that you wouldn't know any other way about it. You do
Mhm.
learn that there are costs. I mean, a lot of times people will look at something and say, wow, this has only got about $5 worth of materials in it. Well, yeah, well, it's not just the materials you buy,
Yeah.
it's and so there's so many factors in running a small
Mhm.
business, and especially starting up. Um,
Yeah.
so I totally understand that, and I'm going to be praying for you to be
Yeah.
able to continue and be successful. But yeah, people have got to understand that at this point in time,
Mm.
you do have a certain price point that you cannot go below, or you can't produce the product. And
Yeah.
there's all kinds of overhead. And even though you're doing it on your own and it's a small business, it's a lot. Now, have you looked into getting some kind of help with the business taxes and stuff like that, so that because you can write a lot of things off that people don't think of when they first get
Yeah.
started in a small business?
Yeah, I have a CPA to help with
Good.
not like internal, like I can't hire a full-time CPA, but I have an external CPA to help with things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's just like you said, it's just a lot of learning lessons and learning as I go. And just
Well,
it's a
and
fun journey that go ahead.
I was just going to say, pouring some, it sounds like, because, and I learned this when I had my little business. It's so important, and a lot of people don't pour a lot of the proceeds back into the business,
Mhm.
especially on the front end when you're first starting up. And if you do that faithfully and don't pay yourself, which you've obviously that's been your strategy, if you do
Yeah,
that, then you can continue and develop and grow a really successful business. But there has to be a certain amount of sacrifice on the front end, and
hmm,
you've been making those sacrifices, so it's going to pay off. Just don't run your health into the ground, because we
yeah.
need
I'm
you.
I'm in it for the long game, so I'm doing this very strategically, making sure that I don't disintegrate into thin air.
Good.
Awesome,
That's
Shalom. Well,
important.
I wanted to. Oh, I wanted to wrap this up with like a very quick 3 speed round questions just to tickle your mind right
Okay.
before we part ways. Would you be cool with that?
Yeah, that's intriguing, tickling my mind. I like that. I like that idea. Tickle
That
away.
phrase, that phrase, okay, I'm going to digress really quick. That phrase was like the name of a software I used when I first got hired into medical devices many
Cool.
years back. And it was
Yeah,
called mind tickling. I'm like, dude, I'm going to use this phrase for the rest of my life. I love
that's a good
how that
one.
sounds. Yeah. But the first thing is, if you had to give someone who's kind of still in the beginning stages of their mental health journey and they don't know what to do, what are what would be the top 3 things, three tools you would recommend that they look into adding into their lives?
Well, the first one, I think, because I think one of
Mhm.
the absolute most important things is sleep. So, educating yourself on sleep hygiene, trying to get yourself get your circadian straightened out. And the way that I have found to do that is by getting on a schedule, and that schedule starts. There's a doctor, a surgeon named Dr. Cruz, Kruse, he's on YouTube, he's on Facebook. He's brilliant. He's kind of crazy, but that sometimes goes with it. But he knows his stuff, and he will not mentor anyone unless the very first and foremost thing they have to do is they have to promise that they will get up and watch the sunrise for at least 10 or 15 minutes of the sunrise every morning. And that will straighten your circadian rhythms out.
Yeah.
It'll make you
That's,
automatically go to sleep and sleep better at night. So, of course, people that are on weird shifts and stuff, they can't do stuff like that. But it has been proven over and over again that that will shorten your lifespan and your health span. So
mhm.
that, I think, is the absolute most important thing I would advise someone, because that can mess with so many parameters in your health journey. Um,
Agreed. Before you
yeah,
say the second one, I just wanted to say I agree. That's why when people buy KALM, the first video I send them is, let's work on your sleep. Okay.
absolutely. That's a biggie, biggie, big. Um, I do think that the second
Yeah.
thing, because of so many factors, our soil is no good anymore because we haven't. Our agricultural methods are terrible, and we don't. Scripture says we're supposed to let the land lie fallow once every 7 years. We've never done anything like that, and we're not supposed to monocrop like we do, and so we've ruined our soil. It's depleted. We're not getting the nutrients that we need, and then we poison everything with the pesticides and all of that. So it's really important to, because our food is already substandard, even the good stuff, even the organic stuff. Um, it's really, really important to try not to eat the stuff that is bad for you. I mean, the organic stuff is going to be the best you can do. So even though it costs more money, there's an old saying that says you can either pay the farmer today or you can pay the doctor tomorrow. And it is so
Oh,
true. It's a choice. And yeah, it's expensive. It's more expensive to buy organic. It's more expensive to buy foods that are, not processed. It's also more time consuming to cook for yourself and not go out to eat until they straighten out the seed oil thing, which they're trying to do, it looks like. But just there's really, now there is an app, um,
mhm.
seed oil something. Gosh. Anyway, there is an app. It starts with seed oil, and they will help you look up restaurants that are not using seed oils. But seed oils, a lot of the health gurus are saying that seed oils are worse for you than cigarettes. They're worse for your health. They're more damaging and more toxic to your health
Mhm.
than cigarette smoking. Now, that's a pretty big thing to say, but there's many, many jumping on that bandwagon every day. So it's a big deal. we've got to figure out a way to disengage from our addictions because they've addicted us on purpose. Those chemmies went in there and found the bliss point and hooked us. And we've got to get off of that. And I will tell you, if you cook for yourself and you don't eat out for about a month, you will start to realize that you can make yourself, a $50 dinner plate at home for 10 or 15 bucks. Something that would cost you $50 at a really fine dining restaurant. And it's going to taste better than what they fixed because even the fine dining restaurants use seed oils. So once you figure that out, it starts. And if you just do it, I'll tell you another little thing about the food that has helped me immensely. An air fryer. Now, yes, I know about the PFAS and everything that's in the coatings and stuff, but you can now get air fryers with a glass basket. So I recommend an air fryer because it really makes the food taste good. It's fast. It's, clean. If you get the glass, if you don't, you can also put silicone with parchment inside of it to line it. And that cuts down on the exposure to the PFAS. But anyway, just learn some simple recipes and eat simple. I am essentially doing a ketovore is what I call it because it's kind of keto, but it's kind of carnivore. It's real heavy on meat. I mostly eat, I usually eat at least a pound of ground beef every day. And I get the grass fed.
There you go.
You want the grass fed.
Protein.
It's it's more expensive to get the grass fed. But if you get that grain-fed stuff that comes from the factory farms, more toxins, and you're getting what you pay for because the grass-fed has got multiples more nutrients. So, it's the same amount, the same calories, but way more nutrients. So it's worth it. So yeah, the food, you got to work on the food because do you know, James, that there are now clinics that are using, and there's even I think there's a Facebook group now. Well, anyway, the point is, and overseas there's a clinic that's dedicated to mental health issues and curing them using, a ketone type of protocol. And it's curing schizophrenics. It's curing people with like really major mental disorders, and it's just a shame that doctors and psychiatrists, they don't address the nutrition. Of course, they're not taught because the schools are run and funded by people that don't want you to know that. So yeah, the food, number 2. You ready for number 3?
Yeah, no, I was going to say definitely food is a huge part just because of all the inflammation and inflammation in the brain can lead to all sorts of problems, symptoms, mental health struggles, things like that. And I've definitely heard even from like Jordan Peterson who've completely changed his chronic diseases with his diet and things like that. And I would say, I'm not going to say it's going to work for everyone who is experiencing schizophrenia, or anything super severe like that. But I guess my question will be, is it worth trying, right? Like, what's the harm in trying it for a month, right? And and maybe it might not help with the severe underlying disease, but you'll still get a bunch of other benefits, right? So, but I guess the reason why it's hard for people to try is because it's hard. It's hard to be on a strict diet that's
socially. That's one place that it's really hard is
socially, and just trying something new. It's very hard for society to come out their comfort zone, and I know I've been in there for the first for like 8 years when I just lied around the bed doing nothing. But for change to happen, action needs to come first. Change doesn't happen on its own. You just need to try different things and see what works best for you. Okay, I'm ready for that number 3 now. Yeah.
I got to think it up first. Let me see now. What has
I
really...
thought you incorporated number 3 in your number 2 answer when you said addiction.
Well,
yeah.
Well, yeah, because there is such a thing as, excuse me, food addiction. You know, the binge eating thing, I did spend some time in a Facebook group with a lady by the name of Dr. Joan Ifland, Ifland. She has a wonderful Facebook group that gets together on a regular, they have like Zoom meetings throughout the day, every day you can get onto, kind of like a AA type of scenario where you can jump into a meeting when you need it, you know, and talk to other people that are addicts. She has literally written the textbook on food addiction. They use it in colleges now to teach about it. And it's a thing. And I mean, we know, we've looked at brain studies. We see, especially sugar and flour, lights up your brain just like various drugs, including cocaine and stuff like that. And they've done animal tests that have shown that the mice will go for sugar even if they're addicted to cocaine. If they're addicted to sugar, they'll hit the sugar up first. They'll refuse the Coke. And Coke is a very strong addiction.
Same with social media. It lights up the exact same parts of the brain.
Yes.
That's why it's so addicting.
It is.
And that's why there's withdrawals.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really an awful thing that has happened. And a lot of people don't realize that they're addicted, especially if they have cut out sugar, but they haven't cut out the flour products, because the flour products will spike your insulin just like sugar and results in the same problems. So if you don't get your, you know, there's a lady that goes, she's on YouTube and Facebook, and she's a doctor. Let me think. She goes by the Glucose Goddess. That's her name. And she says that every time your insulin spikes, and I mean really spikes, which, you know, even a dinner roll can spike your insulin really bad and throw it off. Every time it does that, it's causing what they call glycation. And glycation is kind of like the rusting of metal, except it's your cells in your body are rusting in a way. And so every time that you have this glycation result from insulin spikes, it's aging you, just like rust ages a piece of metal. So it's like the epitome of anti-aging is to get those insulin spikes under control. And I'll give you one other little thing that really helped me that I did for a while. See if you can get your doctor. Well, one way you can do it is get your doctor to do an A1C on you. And if your A1C, so many people are pre-diabetics. A lot of people are diabetic and don't know it. So if your A1C shows that you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, get your doctor to prescribe you a continuous glucose monitor.
I used to work for continuous glucose monitor companies. I used to work for Dickson.
So you know what I'm talking about. It makes a huge difference to get that feedback and to see what your body, because again, everybody's body's different. Some people get away with stuff, no insulin spike, but other people shoots it way up. So it's a really, really helpful tool. I would recommend at least wearing one for a month, if not longer. Now, it was such a blessing. I got a doctor that was actually willing to do that for me just based on my A1C. Not all of them will do it. A lot of them say, no, you got to be diabetic. Well, that's just kind of dumb, because if you wait till you're diabetic, it's even harder to get it under control. But if you'll go ahead and find out now, there are some CGMs on the market now, as I'm sure you're aware, that you can get without a prescription. They're pricey, but it's really worth it if you can muster the funds to do that. And again, a lot of insurance is covering it now for people. It's worth looking into. Awesome tool.
Definitely. I feel like it never hurts to learn more about your body, and just kind of with that information, you can literally see how like the food you eat, you can literally see the damage it's doing to your body. I guess for some people that might be a little scary, but I think sometimes you just need to be handed the hard truth, right? You can't always live in this fairy tale land thinking everything's okay. Maybe you can. I mean, you're welcome to do whatever you want. But
not for long and not be healthy.
The truth is going to come sooner or later. But those are really good. Sleep.
One more.
Oh, go ahead.
And
Sleep, diet, CGMs, and then the fourth extra bonus one. Go ahead.
Okay. Turn your modem off at night if you can. And you probably can if you really think about it. I mean, a lot of people, can't do that. Got to have the phone on just in case I got a call. You really have to, unless you're like a caregiver for somebody that needs to be able to get it. And then you can, like what I did with my mom, I set it up so that, I had like a little doorbell thing that she could punch, to get me to come running up the stairs. Anyway, the point is EMFs. Some people, everybody has a different reaction to EMFs. Some people are way more sensitive than others. Some people have to do like a bubble boy thing. They can't even be, they have to go out in the wilderness and live in a bubble. But and what made me think of this was, like you said, if you can't see something, if you can't see evidence of the problem, it's a lot harder to do anything about it. So, you might go on Amazon and get you a radio frequency meter and walk around your house and find it, because you will be amazed at how zapped you're getting. And especially around your bed, you want to check and see if you've got outlets right behind your head where you sleep, stuff like that. Unplug that stuff. Or what I did was I plugged everything into that plug to a surge protector, and then I plugged the surge protector into a little device that has a remote control to it, so I can turn that outlet off at night, and it'll turn the one on the plugs behind my head. It'll turn the one on the other end of the house that's got the modem plugged into it, so I can turn the modem on and off from the bed. And I turn it off at night right before I go to sleep, and I turn it on when I first wake up in the morning. It's a simple thing. Those little plugs that you can plug stuff into and have a remote to, they're not expensive, and they are super handy. And it's just important, because if you could see, I don't know if you've ever seen they've done some photographs that people have taken using special lenses that can pick up the RF and the all the different frequencies, the electromagnetic and the RF and everything. And if you see what it looks like, we're swimming in a soup, an electromagnetic soup, and you don't get away with that. We've no society, no civilization has ever lived in that kind of environment before. And the cell phone is another thing. Electromagnetic stuff it's tricky, and they're only just now starting to admit it. They're starting to admit the cell phones. Don't ever stick your cell phone up next to your head. Don't do it, because it's right next to your brain, and you know how many brain cancer used to be never happened to anybody. And I've already met people that had brain cancer and died of brain cancer. And it's like, we know where it's coming from, and don't put your laptop on your lap. You can get little things to set it on that will shield your lap if you've got to set it on your lap. But start becoming aware of those electromagnetic frequencies. And the first and foremost thing I would do is turn the modem off at night. That's a good place to start, and just see if that doesn't improve. That actually goes with number one. It will improve your sleep.
Okay.
You sound guilty to me.
No, yeah, I mean, I live in I rely on technology a lot. I definitely don't like social media that much because as soon as I took a month off from social media, it was night and day on how detrimental it was to my mental health. But then outside of social media, I'm very heavily dependent on technology. So
Everybody is, but I'm sure you are with business.
Printers, yeah. So there's definitely a lot of technology around me. I feel like maybe I may have not experienced that night and day with EMF for me to, but then it's also maybe because I never tried it, right? It's one of those things like you just have to try it yourself and experience it yourself. It's just like you said, different people have different sensitivities. For some people, you might get all those like the ringing in the ear or just headaches. For others, they might just have very thick skin or something's just bouncing off, right? Yeah. So just to recap for everyone, sleep, diet, is CGMs, and electronics, which also ties back to number one.
Yep.
Question number two: if you could live anywhere in a fictional world where money is not a problem, where would you and Tikva live?
Knoxville, Tennessee. I love it here.
Okay.
I love it here. Yeah. You know, it's in I live on a hill in a valley. And I know that sounds weird, but my little subdivision that I live in, I live up on top of a little hill, and that, because there's little hills in the valley, and then the Smoky Mountains are just right. They're an hour away, and they are just, talk about therapeutic. That's another thing that's very therapeutic, is to get out. And I know, like, a lot of the Asian countries now are touting something they call what is it? Forest walking or something like that. But it's, getting out there and they've done lots of research. They know that the color green is very healing. So when you're out in nature and you're surrounded by green things, it's good for your head. It really is.
This is so crazy because the last 3 podcasts, which was with a professional poker player and one who is an army physician, she's a family doctor in the army, all said the exact same thing. They're like, be closer with nature. Like, if you have a chance, take your shoes off and just go walk in nature for like 10 minutes. It helps you ground yourself. And Shalom, you just said the same thing. This is so, and the thing is, when different people in different aspects of life share the same message, it makes you think, like, there has to be something behind it, right? So for all of you guys listening out there, take your shoes off, go find a patch of grass.
That's right. The grounding. Yeah, that's a biggie. Tikva, sometimes I call her my little coach, because she knows my 3 things. There are 3 things I try to do every day, little action steps. The first one is the sunrise. Go out there and sit on the deck. I know right where it's going to come up. It moves throughout the year, which is kind of interesting. So I have to tilt the chair a little bit every other week, but it's really cool to watch that sunrise. And even if there are clouds and you can't see the sun, those low angle frequencies are still coming through. And so we go up there, and when I wake up in the morning, I look over at T and I say, I'm going to go watch the sunrise. And boy, she knows what sunrise means. She loves going up there to watch the sunrise. So we go up there, and we've got a double sling chair that we sit in together, and we watch the sunrise. And I do have like a little plastic sport pod that I got, so that if it's too cold, I've got a little heater in there and stuff. So I can do it in the winter too. But but watching that sunrise, she's my little coach to get me up, because I'm not a morning person. So she helps me out. But then the other thing that we do is we try to go out and sunbathe for at least 30 minutes altogether, 15 on one side, 15 on the other. And she knows what let's go sunbathing means. And she will just fly up the stairs to come up and go out on the deck and sunbathe. And then the last thing is usually in the evening sometime, we'll go out into either the front or the backyard. And I've got some sling chairs out there, and I've got her special ball that she loves. And I've got one of these, it's like a thrower thing. So, because I don't have a good throwing arm. So I get that thrower thing and I stick the ball in it and I toss it for her and she goes flying after. So she gets her exercise, and I take my shoes off and put my feet in the grass and just sit there in the chair with my feet on the ground for the whole time that we're out there. Usually I try to make it minimum 30 minutes, but sometimes we're out there for an hour or more.
Yeah.
So those 3 times a day, I get outside. People don't go outside anymore. It's bad. Yeah. So yeah, my little coach.
Love it. Love it. What is actually, I had a question in mind, but I'm going to switch it up. If you can speak to Shalom, 18-year-old Shalom, what's the message you're giving to your younger self?
Oh gosh, I'd probably slap the way out of myself.
Okay, slap, and then what's the message? What's the message after the slap?
Well, I would tell myself, first I would say, I am your future self. I want you to take a good look. I want you to know that it didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to turn out this way. I didn't have to have a bad hip. I didn't have to have a messed up head as my, maybe to a certain extent I did. Some of it I was born with. I do have some DNA stuff, but it didn't have to be this way. And I probably didn't have to be alone either. I went through several failed marriages, and I didn't take the time I needed to get to know people and know that they were not the right person. But first and foremost, I didn't know Yahweh. And I went off on a really bad track. Mm-hmm. And I think I probably would have avoided. I don't think it would have bothered me as much, to be bullied and stuff if I had been going to some kind of a faith-based congregation and had some friends from church or something. Even the Christian church, even though I'm not really into that now, I think that, having a community is so important. And I didn't have a community. We moved down there, I was new. I was from another state. But there was no place to tether myself. And so I was just floating, and I was clearly very vulnerable when the drug dealer girl came along. And yeah, she was kind in some ways, but that was not the right path. And it took me off on a very bad way. And so I would tell myself, you have got to find the truth about the Father in heaven, and you have got to follow his ways. The Jewish people, the whole Hebrew thing about the scriptures, they teach their children the scriptures, and it's the scriptures say. They're doing what the scriptures say as far as train up a child, and he will go the way. He might not at first, but he will have that way to go to. Yeah, you can still, make mistakes. Even if you're brought up believing in the scriptures and trying to follow the scriptures, it's an important book, and it's true. And especially if we study the culture, the Hebrew culture, and the meaning of the if we really study some of the original language, and not everybody's going to be into that, but if you do, wow, you sure do find an awful lot of really useful information and help. So I would try to get myself onto that path early on instead of waiting until I was in my 40s. Yeah. I think that would have helped. I think that would have helped a lot. But, I mean, like you said, people that are in that, if I was already in it, I wouldn't listen to anybody. Now, I did have some people that came to me that sowed seeds that did help later on, but I wasn't interested in listening to anything, anybody. I thought I had it figured out once I got to be a teenager and I got the people off my back that were bullying me.
Yeah, I'm an adult now. I know what I want.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Sadly, that's, but our brains are not fully formed until what? I think they say it's like 20 something.
I think it's it could go into mid-20s or mid and late 20s. So every sip of alcohol, every hit of a joint, every insert, it's all affects the formation of your brain, which can all bite you later on. But Shalom, to anyone watching right now, I promised you guys a crazy story in the beginning, and I pretty sure Shalom delivered on that.
I didn't disappoint anybody, did I?
I truly appreciate you taking the time and having the being brave enough to share the story, because it's not easy to talk about your mental health, right? It's not, but I truly appreciate you, Shalom. And for you guys watching, if you guys have any questions for Shalom, leave a comment down below. I'll try to get answers from her and reply in her stead. But yeah, Shalom, thank you again.